guys, welcome back to my channel. So I'm trying to get this video done before the sun is completely gone. It's a hot day, and it's one of those hot days where it's like hot and rainy, so I am simply in a tank top because it is too hot for anything else, so bear with me. Anyway, as you read in the title, this video is going to be about the Morphe 35O palette. This is one of those hot or not type videos, a hauled it but did I love it type of video. I haven't decided what I'm going to call it yet, but by now you've read in the title, you've seen what I decided upon. But we're going to be talking about this palette today, guys. This is and I'm going to call it infamous, the infamous Morphe 35O. This is a warm neutral palette. This palette has been out for, I want to say, maybe 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years, something like that. I got mine earlier this year. I'll link the haul video where this was included. I don't think I have shown this in a video since I did that haul. I don't think I've done like any looks with it on camera, or I don't think I've spoken on it since that haul. But since that time to now, I have used this palette quite a bit, and I have developed some thoughts and feelings about it, and by the end of this video you will know whether or not I think this palette is worth all of the hype that it has received since it came out and is still currently receiving and all of that jazz. So right off the bat, this palette retails for $22.95, and on the Morphe website I believe the shipping is like $9, so ultimately you come out paying about $31 for the palette. Some YouTubers, a lot of YouTubers have a 10% discount code, which really doesn't take much off. It really only takes about $2 or $3 off, but I mean, I guess that's $2 or $3 that you don't have to spend. So the palette is, in retrospect, against higher end products, the palette is pretty affordable because most higher end products retail for about $36 to about $50 for a palette. But I would not consider Morphe brushes a high-end brand. It does, for me, kind of fall along the lines of a drugstore, kind of like the Sonia Kashuk and the Physician Formula and the Pixie kind of product range and price and you know, that whole situation. So I do think for what it is a bit expensive, but you know, if you've watched a million videos on this palette, and I'm sure a lot of you have, you will see a lot of people tell you that for what it is, for getting 35 shadows, it's really not expensive. Now I would agree with that if all of the shadows in this palette were effective. You know, you have a palette that has 35 shadows, and again, it's supposed to be a warm neutral palette, but I have to start off with letting you guys know that really only about half of this palette is warm. So you have about, let's say, these last 4 rows, yeah, about these last 4 rows here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and going down, I would say those are the bulk of your neutral shades. And then everything else from this spectrum is pretty cool, minus 1 or 2 shades. So minus this one here and maybe this one here. Okay, so there are quite a bit of cool shades in this warm palette. So for someone like me who is predominantly a warm neutral palette lover, a warm neutral shadow lover, I would say that I would have preferred for at least 6/7 of this palette to be warm, and then maybe just 1 row with some cool shades as an option, as opposed to having like this whole bottom section here. This whole bottom section here is designated for cool shadows. What I don't like about this palette is that, there's several things I don't like about this palette, but I'll start off with this one. I don't like all of these cool brown shades here, these deep cool grayish brown shades, because on my skin tone they all come off the same. There's no variation amongst them. So for me, this one looks like this one, 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 and it just kind of makes the palette repetitive for me, you know what I mean? So it's like, out of 35 shades, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shades that all look alike to me. I would have appreciated it if maybe they had only kept 2 or 3 of the shades, or maybe only 2 of them. I think these 2 right here, because these 2 are the warmer of those deep dark browns, and I would prefer that they only kept those 2 and made some variation in the other ones. Maybe made them a little bit more red or a little bit more yellow, you know, just some variations in the brown. There's more that you can do with brown than just give me all of these deep dark shades, because like I said, on my skin tone, when I pop them into my crease, when I pop them into my outer V, they all look the same. So you can sit here and talk about how it's 35 shades in this palette and it's a value, but when you have multiple shades that just look the same, it's not really a value. The other issue that I have with this palette is that these 2 shades here especially, but the shimmer shades in general, but noting these 2, they crumble so much. Picking these up on a brush is so difficult for me, and whenever I use a primer anytime I wear eyeshadow anyway, but I feel like when I wear this palette, when I wear shadows from this palette, I have to especially go in with an extra strong, extra tacky primer in order to get these shadows to stick to my lids, because they crumble, they fall off, they flake off, and it sucks because the shadows, you know, when you swatch them, they're beautiful. Everybody is in love with this palette for a reason, because they're beautiful, you know what I mean? There's a lot of, especially for women of color, when we look for warm neutral palettes, at least for me, what I've noticed is when I look for warm neutral palettes on the market, the palettes that are claiming to be warm neutral, when I get them and I apply them to my eyelids, they're not warm enough, they're not warm neutral enough for me. They still come off really ashy, they still come off really white based, and a shadow that's warm on a medium to light skin tone very well picks up as a cool tone shade on me. So when you have shadows like these that are in this palette that are actually the kind of pigments that we want, we get excited about it and we want to buy it and we want to have it, and we have expectations. I know that when I picked up this palette, especially because of all the hype surrounding it, I had certain expectations for it, but when I got it, it just kind of let me down. Like, look at this. This shade is so crumbly, you know, and it does that on the lid. The pigments bunch up together and they crumble, so you have to like really press it in and pack it on to break up those bunches and to make sure that they stick to the lid so that you can effectively get that warm look to come through. Otherwise it just kind of looks like a wash of shadow and eventually it fades throughout the day. So that's a big problem that I've experienced with this palette if I don't use like a really heavy duty primer to make it stick, and I feel like that's a lot of extra work that I shouldn't have to do. I might be the only person that isn't really here for this palette, because if you go to any social media platform or if you watch any other review, everybody is all about it, and it just, I don't know, maybe it's just my palette, but for me it was a letdown. I mean, I still use it because I have it, and with effort I can make it work. And I'm not saying that the palette doesn't work. I can get a really pretty look from this, but I have to like do so much to make sure that the shadows perform how I need them to. Another issue with these shadows, in particular the shimmery shadows, is that they migrate. So I think this may be or may have something to do with the fact that they are so crumbly. But when they are on the lid, I find that they either migrate up into my crease or they migrate down to my lash line. So then the middle area is left empty. Now that doesn't happen right away. It happens more so towards the end of the day after I've had the shadows on for a prolonged period of time. But I find that they migrate. And I think that that is so strange, because no other shadow that I own, no other shadow does that to me. And I have some pretty cheap shadows like ELF and Wet n Wild, and even some things from Essence and they don't do that to me. Any other shadow that I own, they do not do this migrating thing that this palette does. And so I just don't understand. So I don't know, maybe they just didn't put enough of a mixing medium in this when they were pressing it. I don't know what the deal is, but they just move so much for me. Problems that I have with this palette, I seriously don't have with any other palettes or any other eyeshadows. And like I said, I have to put in a little extra effort to get this to behave how I need it to. And for me, that's a problem. Now, I am really happy to have all of these orange shades, all of these reddish tone shades, and these nice warm browns. I really like that about this palette. I just wish that they did something better with the formula. Okay, so this last 4 rows of this palette, those are my favorite parts of this palette. And I really wish that they would redo this with just these and a better formula, because I do believe that this could be a hit. Now, I know that it's a hit on YouTube, but I mean, personally, for me, it could be a hit if they improved it. The rave reviews about this palette are serious. I've never seen a negative review about it. Other than in real life, like speaking to people in real life. I have spoken to some people that don't necessarily love this palette the way everyone else on YouTube and social media loves it. So I don't know, maybe it's just the frenzy of being online and kind of going with the flow. But for me personally, this palette was a letdown, especially after all of the hype surrounding it. The same situation kind of goes for the lighter shades. They kind of do the same thing that the deeper shades do. Just like how all the deeper shades look alike, all the lighter shades kind of look alike. So you have these 3 shades here, and yeah, in the pan and in the swatch they may appear one way, but when you actually get them on, like this one here has some peach and some pink and some gold all up in there. This one here looks to be more white, and this one here seems to be just a pink. But when you actually get these on, they just, I don't know, they're a letdown to me. When I actually get them on, they actually just kind of look really patchy and they look really white. When I put it on, the initial effect is that iridescent shimmer, that iridescent glow, but as the day goes on, that just kind of goes away and I'm just left with a white ashy shadow on my lid. And I don't mind white shadows, I don't mind ashy shadows sometimes when I am intentionally applying them, you know what I mean? If I pick up a white shadow and I put a white shadow on my lid, on my brow bone, or in my inner tear duct, that's my purpose to use that shadow, you know, that's what I want from that shadow. But if I'm picking up something that has all of these pinky peachy iridescent shades in it, that's because I want the pinky peachy iridescent shades. And if that's only going to last a few hours before it fades away and becomes just another white shadow, it's just not worth it to me. It's just not serving the purpose that I wanted to. Now let's talk about some of the transition shades, or the shades that I use to transition. I use pretty much all of these orange shades to transition, and you can use them on the lids too. I use this kind of brownish red shade here to transition. This, let's see, these two here, these are more yellow toned. I use those to transition, and I find that they can be the transition shades, I find that they are pretty decent, but they can blend away. So when I'm putting them on, I have to blend just right and just stop and leave it, because if I continue blending, they just blend away or they blend into each other too much. So it's like layering them on top of each other to get a desired look, to get a desired effect where I can see the nice soft smooth transition between that yellow shade of brown, that orangey brown, that reddish brown, that gradation between the shades. After a while, that kind of starts to just go away and it just gets muddy. But I'm not knocking them completely, because it can be workable. I can make it happen if I put in the extra effort. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the entire palette is garbage, because it's not. You can get some looks out of it, like I keep saying, because I don't want you to think that the entire palette is trash. But honestly, $22.95 plus the $9 shipping, and so you still end up paying about 30 something, and then depending on where you are, because shipping might be more where you are, I would just say go to Sephora and get something from Sephora that you find to be similar to this, or even in the drugstore you can possibly find something similar to this, or I'm sure that there's a select array of shades, individual shades that I can find and put together to create the kind of palette that I want. It just sucks because this is what I want right here, but the shades just don't perform up to par. They don't give me everything I need. I think my biggest annoyance with this palette, even with the crumbling of the shimmering shades, even with the muddiness or the blending away of the transition shades, in lieu of all of that, my biggest irritation with this palette is definitely all of these cool brown shades, because there are so many cool eyeshadow palettes that these shades are already in, because that's the struggle that I have. Palettes that I have, or palettes that I might be interested in buying, I don't buy them because there are so many cool shades in them that it doesn't make sense for me to buy a palette that has 12 shades and only 2 of the shades are warm. You know what I mean? But I feel like, especially with Morphe, where they mass produce these big old palettes like this, I feel like there are so many of these 35 palettes that have so many of these cool brown shades that they did not need to be in this warm palette, right? So that's my biggest pet peeve with this entire thing. With all of the things that I dislike about this palette, that's number one. It didn't need all of it. They could have put 2 or 3 of them in here and it would have been fine. It would have been enough. They could have also thrown in a black into this palette. You have a palette with 35 shades and a million grayish browns, but you don't have a black in the palette. I find that to be a little bit annoying, not to say the least. But again, I do still use this palette. I do still manage to get some looks out of it. I will not use this palette on a day where I need my makeup to last from like 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. I will not use this palette on a day where I have a long, full, extended day where I'm going to be out, where I'm going to be in the sun, because the shadows do not last that long. They do not survive the entire day. I will use this palette if I'm having a shorter, maybe 2 to 4 hour day where I'm just out doing something really quickly, doing a quick run, and that's as much time as I will give it, because I don't find that they hold up. And like I mentioned, I have e.l.f. and Wet n Wild shadows that last the entire day. I put them on, set them, no problem, good to go. But this just doesn't perform like that. And because of this, I don't think, at least not right now, I don't know, how long into the future, but as of right now, I probably won't be purchasing any other Morphe eyeshadows. It just didn't do it for me. It just didn't impress me. It just didn't wow me. And I did see that they have the this same palette, but it's all matte, and then the same palette again with all shimmers. And I think that they should have done that from the get-go. Like, this itself is pretty good as far as which shades they chose to be matte and which shades they chose to be shimmers. But I feel like for them to come back out and do a all matte palette or an all shimmer palette, if you already have this, you don't need to pick those up, because you're gonna get the same exact looks. You really are, to be perfectly honest with you, because let's be real, this orange is gonna look like this orange right here. There's not much variation. Yeah, it's a little bit deeper and maybe it's more, oh, I just jabbed my finger in it. Maybe it's more mango toned and this one is more like tangerine, you know, like it's the small variations in it, but honestly they kind of all end up looking the same anyway. So if you already have this palette, you don't necessarily need to go and get the other two, which are the exact same palette, just all matte or all shimmer, unless you are a Morphe brushes stan and you just have to have them all. I don't know, for me this was a good enough learning experience for me, and I will not be picking up any more, at least for right now. Maybe in the future, if I ever, you know, if their formulas improve and if I get to see the products in store at first and I get to play around with them before purchasing, and I can decide for myself right then and there if I want to get them. But as far as ordering them online, as far as picking up more of these same palettes with this same formula, no, I will not do it. So that's it for this hit or miss. I'm sorry to say that this palette is a miss for me. I hauled it, but I did not love it. And I may be the only person with a video on here telling you that they do not love this palette, but it's my truth. And you know, I hope that you can appreciate my truth, because that's really how I feel about this palette. I wish I loved it, because the colors are my speed. Those orangey warm browns, those are what I personally love. So I really do wish that I loved this palette, but it had too many problems, too many things that let me down, and I can't get jiggy with it, yo. I just can't. So okay guys, so that's it for this video. Go ahead and give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I really do hope that you appreciated my honest opinion about this palette. But yeah, if you are new to my channel, hi, thank you for joining me. I appreciate you. Go ahead and subscribe, because I know that you want to. And to all of my older subscribers, thank you so much for continuing to support this channel. I see you, I see your comments, I see some of your requests, and I got you. All right guys, I will talk to you in another video. Bye.